The Galien Foundation fosters, recognizes, and rewards excellence in scientific innovation to improve the human condition.
André Malraux said once in one of his novels, "Une vie humaine ne vaut rien, mais rien ne vaut une vie humaine." Human life is worth nothing, but nothing is worth a human life. All these men and women are trying to save human lives. Is there anything more noble than that?
The Galien Awards ceremony is considered the equivalent of the Oscars night for the innovators in the labs and awards every year Best Pharmaceutical Product, Best Biotechnology Product, Best Product for Orphan Rare Diseases, Best Medical Technology, Best Digital Health Solution, Best Incubator Accelerator Equity, Best Startup. Around the globe, the Prix Galien is considered as the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for the industry, mobilizing an unrivaled network of Nobel laureates and top biomedical scientists. The Galien Foundation manages an independent, cross-functional, and geographically diverse program of events and sponsorship to brand the best of the best in new medicines and diagnostics. The Prix Galien is a welcome initiative to stimulate creative research and promote excellence. Barack Obama. The Roy Vagelos Pro Bono Humanum Award for Global Health Equity is bestowed to an individual, a company, an academic institution, or a non-governmental agency that has helped to improve the human condition through the application of biopharmaceutical science to problems of developing or underserved populations worldwide.
This is the right event, on the right issue, at the right time.
Staging this event in Africa is a significant statement that science and innovation are needed as much here in Africa as anywhere else.
I'm particularly grateful to receive this award.
The awards are among the highest honors in science and commerce because they lead to improvement in the human condition.
The Prix Galien Awards recognize the world's brightest minds and most innovative companies. They are a true celebration of the hard work required to produce life-changing interventions.
That is what makes us optimistic about the future.
Congratulations to all of you.
Make a difference. Join the Galien Foundation.
Welcome, everyone, to the Galien Foundation Week of Biomedical Innovation. Hopefully you voted on the poll that was just on our screens. This particular webinar is really in conjunction with the annual Galien Forum, which will be taking place in person tomorrow. And the reason for these webinars is really to allow us to spend more time talking to and understanding more about our nominees for the various categories within the Prix Galien that's being awarded tomorrow. This year, the US awards have actually received 178 nominees from 150 companies. And within the biotechnology sector, there's different categories, including the one we'll be discussing today, which is in genetic, autoimmune, and chronic disorders. Today, I have the pleasure of being able to do a fireside chat with Amy Sandert from BMS, and discussing something that she's been working on for some time. So first of all, welcome, Amy. And can you tell us a little bit about your background, first of all, please?
Thank you. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here. So I I'm a pediatric cardiologist. I was trained at UCSF and spent about a decade there as a physician scientist, interested in research. And I've been in industry for about 18 years, the last 6 of which have been working on the clinical development of mavacamten that we're going to talk about today, first through joining Myocardia, and then currently at Bristol Myers Squibb, which acquired at the end of 2020. I'm currently a vice president and a global program leader in the cardiovascular therapeutic area.
Fantastic. And can you tell me, it sounds like this product has had quite a journey between different companies. Can you tell us a little bit around why this was a particular indication that anyone was interested in at the time, and how kind of that developed? Be interested to hear that.
Yeah, I think this is a tremendous story of bench to bedside. It really links decades of clinical, genetic, and basic research into hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, or HCM, with some more recent, newer knowledge about the underlying pathophysiology and how that might be addressed within the sarcomere, within the heart muscle cell, and begin to approach it for the first time ever in a disease-specific way. And so the original founders and individuals who started on this journey were building upon that connection, and there was also some really compelling preclinical data. It is a genetic disease, and there were genetic animal models in which to explore, and really seeing a prevention of disease progression, an impact on disease that existed that could be potentially disease modifying, was really a trigger to explore the development.
And are these patients that basically are found once they present with symptoms, or is this something one can, because it's genetic, one can look for prior to that?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. So HCM is the most common form of genetic heart disease. It can occur in up to 1 in 500 individuals. About half of it is genetic autosomal dominant, in which several genes are now known to cause it. So you might find out you have it because there's a family history and there's genotyping even before you present with the disease. But more commonly, it shows up in adults who are experiencing a variety of symptoms and somewhat non-specific symptoms. And so there can be a diagnostic odyssey, those being, shortness of breath, fatigue, exercise intolerance, and a reduced quality of life. And once diagnosed and over time, it's a thickening of the heart muscle, and that can lead to an obstruction or blockage of outflow of the blood from the heart. And of course, sometimes we read about it in the newspaper and in an unfortunate sudden death, for example, of a young athlete or someone in the community that's younger. So it does predispose to risks, some serious risks of arrhythmia, syncope, or passing out, heart failure, and those sudden death instances.
Right, and then prior to this, how were clinicians treating this disorder?
Yeah, so for decades, really since the 60s, the oral medical treatment for the disease has been recommended on an empiric basis, and using drugs that were really developed for other cardiovascular diseases. So beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, potentially disopyramide. And these have been used to treat symptoms primarily. And if in the case of obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, the obstruction becomes so severe, there are invasive procedures that again, have been performed for quite some time. A surgical myectomy to remove part of that heart muscle that's obstructing the blood flow, or a so-called alcohol septal ablation, which is a catheter-based procedure. And so significant unmet need in terms of, again, doing something besides just treating the symptoms and in a more disease-specific way.
Right. So really it's breakthrough in the sense that there's specifically developed for this disorder, whereas before there was nothing. So that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Have you seen in terms of impact for patients in their clinical outcomes?
Yes. So, Camzyos did have breakthrough designation actually from the FDA and was developed as first in class to really address this medical need and to shift the paradigm from treating only symptoms to the underlying pathophysiology. The response has been pretty remarkable in terms of what we've shown in the trials, which I'm happy to talk about a little bit further, as well as now in the clinic after being approved in April of 2022. And now with global approvals, we're starting to reach more patients. And for the patients, there is a significant reduction in the level of obstruction, an improvement in symptoms and how they feel. We measured oxygen consumption on a cardiopulmonary exercise test, but I think what you would hear from a patient, something much more relatable, being able to run around and chase grandchildren or carry a basket of laundry up the stairs, basically be able to function better, to feel better and not to feel so inhibited, by those symptoms. And the physicians have seen this change in the clinic as well as the treatment has been initiated.
Right. And then how is the academic community kind of, because this is a brand new treatment, what has that meant for sort of academics who are focused on this area?
Yeah, it's interesting because I mentioned decades of the disease being described, being known. However, when a new treatment comes to the fore, kind of a whole different and new awareness of the disease comes to be. So there's been a lot of efforts to educate and re-educate about this disease. It is diagnosed with multiple modalities, an echocardiogram. The imaging is really diagnostic, but there are many other tests and procedures that the patients undergo to get their diagnosis and treatment plan. So with this new class of treatment coming to the fore, in fact, a new medical society was formed, the HCM Society. It was established a year ago in 2022 and just had its second annual meeting. And it's great for the patients in the field that it's getting this much attention. It's gotten attention from patient advocacy groups for years. And obviously now the clinicians see, again, new opportunities to understand the disease and provide kind of a holistic basis of care, and including having this new treatment and understanding how to work that into the workflow in the clinic to take care of these patients.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, as I do believe that many times people underappreciate how much a new treatment in an area can spur further academic work and interest, right? So I think that's another sort of wonderful side effect of new breakthrough treatments for sure. Now,
Yeah.
I believe that every compound pretty much is its own, it's like making a movie. If you make a blockbuster, it's kind of, as you can't keep doing them, everyone has a different kind of unique flavor to it. So I think every drug has a journey that's kind of different. So in this case, can you tell me about some of the challenges, maybe all the way from early development through late development and marketing, and whether any of that kind of you have taken some lessons from that journey?
Yeah, there's definitely been a number of firsts and a number of lessons and examples. And I would say that comparatively, I think it moved from those preclinical, very impressive preclinical studies in animals to humans rather rapidly. We moved into the first phase 3 trial, the Explorer HCM trial, on the heels of a 20 patient open label phase 2. So that was pretty quick. I think that in terms of those trials and the design of those trials, we developed novel endpoints, a composite endpoint of cardiopulmonary exercise testing and New York Heart Association functional class, so-called feel and function endpoints to measure based on 30 weeks of treatment, being that would be addressing a key part of the unmet need, feeling poorly and functioning poorly. And so it was a journey to define that endpoint, to generate the data. Again, it was about 251 patients treated globally in 13 countries. First randomized control trial that was completed and largest and successful in HCM. And so, believe it or not, there was just a learning curve with the participating clinical trial sites, because this wasn't necessarily a field of specialists who were trialists. And so conducting that trial with a high degree of integrity to get that result in the improvement of oxygen consumption in New York Heart Association class, and in the secondary endpoints of relieving obstruction, improving patient symptoms based on patient-reported outcomes. There were a lot of things that were incorporated in the trial and the trial endpoints that were new and novel, And so going through the regulatory process, talking a lot about the clinical meaningfulness of that and the clinical meaningfulness of those changes and analysis of the overall benefit risk. Of course, we also monitor the patients frequently. There's a dose titration period, so really kind of understanding how to get to an optimized individualized dose was a big part of this story, and learning how to adjust that and keep patients safe while getting the efficacy. We also conducted a second phase 3 trial, the Valor HCM trial, which directly asked the question for a population of patients who were actively considering septal reduction therapy surgery and were eligible per the current, guidelines for HCM. What would 16 weeks of treatment do in terms of that SRT eligibility? And the Valor trial was able to show that more patients compared to placebo were no longer guideline eligible in that randomized control period of 16 weeks. And we've recently presented and published data out to 56 weeks, showing a sustained and persistence of this finding of remaining not guideline eligible and continuing on medical therapy. So I think that second trial was very clinically relatable. If I can avoid a surgery and take the medication, this clearly is impactful. And so lest we say that was completely done during the pandemic. The first patient was enrolled in July of 2020, and the study was read out in early 22. So there was a lot of interest, and I must say for these patients, high compliance with the trials, and we have long-term extension studies as well. So another challenge is the safety database. So really building our safety database through time by collecting that data on long-term extension and continuing to show the persistence of the efficacy and maintaining tolerability and safety.
Right, so I have a couple of questions left for you, but before I ask those, just to remind to those who are participating that this is your chance if you want to ask a question. So while I'm asking the next couple, we'll look for Q&A, but otherwise we'll wrap up otherwise if there are no Q&A. But I certainly have plenty of questions. First one is you mentioned, having a novel outcome measure, which is never an easy thing in drug development. It seems to me also that it sounds like you were the only company really working on this. There wasn't like a bunch of companies being able to come together and a consensus around that. Is that correct? Like basically it was you guys, yeah. How did you find how open were the regulators? They obviously ultimately approved it, so they must have been open. But talk a little bit about, sometimes people think FDA is, not open to new ideas, etc. Talk about your experience of, persuading FDA around a novel outcome measure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and again, I speak on behalf of so many individuals and teams that contributed to this story, and I believe the history is that they started early with conversations with the agency about the idea, about how it would look. Of course, there was epidemiology that went into the process of understanding what could reasonably be done, and on that premise, and proposing and just having the appropriate dialogue about the endpoints. This was definitely reviewed and agreed as we embarked down that path as being the most being meaningful for this indication. That's
great. You mentioned that some of it was done during the pandemic. Did you have to switch to kind of decentralized methodologies, or how did the trial continue?
Yeah, it's a good question. Explorer had started in mid 2018, and the last patient visits were in early 2020. So thankfully, that first randomized controlled trial wasn't seriously impacted because the primary endpoint was peak VO2, and so doing CPETs became an issue due to the aerosolization, etc. So thankfully that one was mostly complete and did complete. The long-term extension studies we managed through that earlier phase based on making sure that the patients could have the needed procedures, and we did have some remote visits in place, and remote monitoring, etc., like many people did. With the Valor trial, the endpoint was different. We didn't have that peak VO2, but there were still visits for monitoring and the echocardiograms, and it got started a little bit later than originally anticipated. But again, we were able. It was 19 sites in the U.S. only, so it wasn't as expansive as Explorer had been. But yeah, patients did still have to find a way in for those visits for the echocardiograms.
But was some of the assessments switched to remote, or were they basically having to come in anyway?
No, they were coming in.
Got it. Okay, so but you managed to do it through the pandemic, which is no small feat for sure. Well, I'm just checking again, making sure. I don't think there's any Q&A. Is there anything else, Amy, I haven't asked you about this product or development that we should cover? I'm sure there's 1,000, but is there anything else you think we should cover?
Many. Yeah. No, I think that it is a unique story, in cardiovascular, to be first in class to address a very long-standing problem, and this has really opened the door. There is a non-obstructive form of the disease. We currently have an ongoing phase 3 trial, the Odyssey trial, looking at effects of mavacamten in non-obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. We're really seeing week to week increases in its use out there in the real world. And I think that, having the field continue to collect that data, real world information, this is a story that's just beginning, and there will be a lot more to come.
Great. Well, I know you're going to have a lot of fun tomorrow at the forum of the Galien Foundation at the Alexandra Center. I hope you have a great time there, and best of luck with the award ceremony, and really appreciate you spending time with us today. I also want to mention that, absolutely, and I want to also mention that this webcast will be viewable on the Galien Foundation website. I really appreciate everyone who dialed in. I'm sure more will watch it on the website. And again, thank you, Amy, and congratulations.